Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Watch Us Thrive podcast. This is your girl Leanne, and I am super excited that we have a male guest on the show. These come very few and far between, but I'm always so excited to come across men who are really out here doing work that is not seen in the personal development world and mental health and talking about trauma and abuse and all of that. This week we have Caleb Harris. He's an author, blogger, filmmaker, poet, speaker, and life and recovery coach. So he's a man of many, many hats. He's also the founder of Choosing Your Freedom, a faith based recovery coaching business. Having conquered his own battles, Caleb envisioned a sanctuary where men could break free from the chains of addiction and discover their God given purpose. Through faith based recovery coaching, Choosing Your Freedom endeavors to be a beacon of hope, inspiring men to find redemption, embrace their spiritual journey, and live a life in alignment with God's plan. So, Caleb, you just out here doing God's work.
Pretty much, yeah. Just trying to be a disciple, following what God wants me to do, and just basically what I tell everybody, I put God first and myself second. So that's all I'm doing.
I'm so here for it. I'm so proud to see someone of color stepping into this space. We don't see enough people who look like us brown and black people, really doing this work that is so necessary in these communities that very much lack when it comes to having resources to lean on, when it comes to trauma healing, when it comes to mental health, addiction, recovery, all of these things. So I want to learn a little bit more about you and your story before becoming the man that you are today, and how what you experienced before really shifted you to start doing this healing work that you're doing now.
Yeah, so basically, I grew up in an environment where my mom was around, my dad wasn't around as much. They got divorced when I was like 6 years old. And this is definitely a trigger warning. Like, my dad did try to kill my mom when I was like 6 years old. It was a very traumatic thing that happened with me. And I come from a faith based background, obviously, but in the church world, they didn't really talk a lot about mental health because they just always believe if you just pray and pray and pray, eventually it'll go away, or they thought it was something that was demonic. So they thought they just casted a demon out of you and you will be just fine. Because these things, as you were saying earlier, we don't talk about them, so nobody really knows how to really do anything about it. So I obviously get into substance abuse, I get into trouble. I end up being sexually abused around like 10 years old, and I end up not really saying anything about it because I knew no one was really going to believe me anyway. And I kind of just said, you know what? I'm just gonna move on my life, and that's about it. And how I moved on my life is I got into substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, things like that, and I just put myself in my studies. So like high school, college, graduated, but when I graduated, I just didn't have anything to do. So I started getting even more heavier into drugs because I'm bored, I'm lonely, then I become more promiscuous. I'm doing all these crazy things because of the root causes. I just wanted attention. I just wanted someone to let me know that like it was okay that you were going through all these things, that God has a bigger purpose for you. But I just wanted someone just to tell me that everything was going to be okay, everything was going to be all right, and there was nothing that you could do. So I guess that's my story in a nutshell.
Wow. So I'm curious to know, was there some sort of, I like to call it my come to Jesus moment, where you really realize there was some sort of like pivotal shift that happened for you to really realize I'm going down this really ugly, dark path. I need to make the switch. Was that something that you experienced, or how did you get to the point that like now I need to start healing from the trauma that's been really following me throughout my entire childhood into adulthood? What did that journey kind of look like for you?
I think it was like that last time. It was January 2nd, 2019. Me and a young lady were just being promiscuous, and then it just didn't work out the way I wanted it to. I think I just got so tired of like the bar and club life because it was so shallow and lonely, and people aren't talking to each other. Like people are just, hey, selfie with their drink in their hand and stuff like that. And I just was like, I went through a more spiritual journey, an awakening with God, and I started reading the Bible more and praying more. That's when I gave up drinking completely. I didn't go to like rehab or anything. I just said, I just don't want to do this. And then I got back into the church like 3 years later. I got baptized in the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. So basically, I just decided, you know what? Yeah, this isn't the life that I want to live anymore. I was just bored and just tired of just really just playing a character. So I guess it was a combination of having that Jesus moment and just tired of just playing this like character and just being something that I'm not. So combination of the two.
I definitely can relate to that. I think a lot of us, it's easy for us to wear a mask to play a role of someone that we know we really don't want to be, but we find ourselves kind of stuck on this hamster wheel of life, of really just like existing. And you kind of get to the point where you get sick and tired of your own shit. And then you realize this cannot be just what life is. Like there has to be more to it. And I think a lot of the times it takes for us to go through some really big traumatic experiences to have that wake up call. Like when I think about my own story, I was in an abusive relationship that almost took my life. And it was in the process of me almost dying that I realized, okay, we got to make some changes. We got to do something different because this cannot be the be all end all of just repeating these same toxic cycles over and over in these different types of relationships and not really finding any purpose or fulfillment in life with the substances of like drugs, of alcohol, of sex, all of these things. So, yeah, I appreciate you for sharing that.
Yeah, no doubt. It was just one of those things I just told myself is like I just didn't want to keep going in the same thing as you said, like the hamster wheel. Like eventually, the wheel does stop, and then that's the time where you got to take that time to just self-reflect. And me being a natural introvert, it was just I would spend times in my apartment. I was just like, man, I don't want to keep doing this no more. Like even those times I was drinking alone, I was like, I don't want to keep doing this, and like I don't want to keep hanging out with the same people. So I've lost friends, I've lost family, but I've also gained friends and family too. And what I tell people about sobriety is that it's not easy at first because you have to rediscover who you are. Many people come from traumatic backgrounds in the church. Some people have been abused by the church. So now they have to figure out who God is for them. Like, am I going to be a Christian? Am I going to be spiritual? That's totally up to you. Myself, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. That's me. But when I tell people my story, I don't force it down people's throat. I always tell people when it comes to substance abuse and trauma, it does affect the brain, it affects the body. I read this book called The Body Keeps Store. What's it called? The Body Keeps Score. That's what I mean. And the body does keep score. Like a lot of us are waking up and we're sore, we're thinking it's a bad workout, but it could just be a trauma response.
Yes, I love that book. Definitely will link it in the show notes. I recommend anyone who's on a personal development journey, go check out that book because it's definitely one that you'll be able to relate to. Trigger warning, it can be heavy reading some of the things. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different aspects that you talk about when it comes to your story and how you're helping people. And you touched on it a little bit. And I want to talk about church hurt, right? And when it comes to forgiveness as a part of your healing journey. Can you share how faith or spirituality has played a role in your own healing process and in your work with your clients?
So when I work with my clients, I realize a lot of them hold on to a lot of bitterness and anger and hostility, which in the recovery world we call it bad hurts, bad hangups, and things of that nature, character defects. A lot of people suffer with pride, and most importantly, it's the ego. So from a more spiritual perspective, the ego will get you really messed up. It'll have you saying and doing things, not wanting to apologize because it is just human nature. Now, from a more biblical, Bible based perspective, it's the flesh versus the spirit. The flesh wants to do this and the spirit wants to do that. So there's a scripture that says in Galatians 5:19, it talks about the fruits of the spirit, which is joy, love, patience, compassion, and understanding. The flesh just wants to cause division, chaos, jealousy, envy, and things like that. So what I always tell my clients is that listen, you have to follow what the spirit wants you to do. You can't just do whatever you want to do. So you have a problem apologizing. Well, you have to apologize to people because even with the men I work with, like doing business, sometimes you have to apologize. Sometimes you have to tell people, hey, look, listen, I apologize about this or that and the other. But if you can't do that, then you're going to build a reputation of being a jerk and you ain't going to make no money. So that's just the way I look at it.
Yeah, getting that ego out of the way. I think that's one of the things that us as humans struggle with the most. But it's once you put that to the side, like just being a humble person and accepting the flaws that you have and embracing them, trying to work on them, I think that really comes with the healing personal development journey. So I want to ask now, because you work with specifically men, or you work with both men and women?
I specifically work more with men, but I do work with some women, but majority men. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we need more people who look like us in those spaces. And there's definitely challenges that men face when it comes to opening up, talking about their emotions, talking about the trauma that they've been through. Why do you think it's so difficult for men in particular to open up? And part two to that question, what are some strategies you found that are effective in helping men really open up the conversation and allow themselves to heal from the things that they've gone through?
Yeah, so basically it's just that lack of fatherhood. I talk about this in my book, Out of Darkness. You know, it talks about two absent fathers. The one absent father is the man who's obviously just not around, and the second absent father is basically just he's just too busy to the point where he can't spend time with his own kids. And men naturally want like that father son, what's it called, camaraderie. Like that's just what they want. That's what they're looking for. So when a young man like myself, I didn't get a lot of attention from my own dad. Like me and my dad just rekindled like 2 years ago, you know. So that's just the way things are. But I had to forgive my dad because, quite frankly, his dad wasn't in his life. So it really was just nothing more than a generational curse. So that's what I learned with a lot of men is like when a lot of men don't get a lot of attention or affection in a non-sexual way, they'll end up trying to search out for sex from other people, and unfortunately, people who get abused, you kind of unfortunately become a target in a way because people who see people are always by themselves, or socially awkward, or just not very talkative, or just lacking in interpersonal skills. Unfortunately, a lot of abusers take advantage of that. And then, you know, people who are always kids who have a history of always lying. Then when they talk about their abuse, then they think, oh, this person's just lying about it. So and so would never do that. They're at the top of the community and this, that, and the other. Like they're a police officer, a firefighter. They have all these things going on for them. So what I tell my clients on how to, you know, build those relationships with like your father or men or just looking for any kind of vulnerability, it's really just about trust. Like men, I've seen it before. I've been in a part of ministries before in my church, and I've been doing a couple of things online as well. It's all about building trust. You don't have to overshare or anything like that, but build trust, build camaraderie, and also just be patient because there's a lot of men that are just not used to talking about their feelings and emotions. So just understand that not that's not what they're used to. But if you just build the trust, the communication, you should ultimately be just fine.
Absolutely. Now, do you think that forgiveness is necessary in order for people to really heal from what they've gone through? And I'm not speaking necessarily in regards to forgiving the people who have hurt them. That's definitely a different conversation, and everyone's journey looks different and everyone's trauma looks different. But what are your thoughts around forgiveness, specifically for self, when it comes to healing?
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately the way that you forgive others. You can't forgive others if you don't forgive yourself. That's what I personally do believe. And a lot of us, we hold on to a lot of bitterness, and it shapes the way that we view God because then we view God as this evil dictator who's just always just trying to keep us in trouble. But unfortunately, a lot of us, because of trauma, because of abuse, we don't really know, like, we're not used to a healthy environment, you know, because we're so caught up in a fight or flight mode, survival mode, and things like that. So we're just used to just chaos. So unfortunately, because we're so used to chaos, whether we realize this or cognitively aware of it, we end up choosing partners who are chaotic because they remind us of familiarity. So, like, I chose a lot of women who were just straight up toxic, but I was always like, why do I keep attracting all these toxic women? But I was toxic within myself. So, I had to forgive myself for being so promiscuous with myself because I was going through my own trauma responses. So, that's what I had to end up doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I talk about accountability all the time on my platform and how that has played a huge role in my own healing, not necessarily taking responsibility for what my abusive ex did to me, but for the role that I played in accepting the situation and not walking away, right? I think taking accountability in whatever aspect, that it's such a hard pill to swallow, but I promise you guys, it will help you heal and grow so much when you're able to reflect and be like, what did I do and what can I learn from these experiences that I've either put myself in or have been dealt? right? I think there's such a healing that comes with you really looking in the mirror and owning a part of what you were dealing with in that situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We've all played a role, whether we realize it or not, but without like that deep self-reflective, deep diving work and without accountability, we end up just blaming everybody else. And eventually, sometimes it's just you. And a lot of us don't like to admit to that because going back to what we were talking about with the ego, but sometimes the problem is staring right in front of the mirror and you have to acknowledge it at one point or another because there's many people out here, they believe that everyone else is the problem, but can't everybody be the problem 24/7? That's just impossible and it don't make no logical sense.
Come on, y'all. He's preaching. I'm not the only one who be saying this, okay? Sometimes we got to look in the mirror. Okay, so I was like stalking your website because I wanted to make sure I got the right questions to ask you. And I just love that there's so many different things that you talk about. And one of the things that you talk about is male sexual addiction, especially within the Black community. So, what are some specific challenges or stigmas that you see associated with this issue? And how can awareness and support be improved around this stigma?
So the thing I've always seen from a black male perspective is just like many of us as black men, whether you grew up in the hood or the suburbs or you were just playing on the basketball court, it was always this societal pressure that you had to lose your virginity because that's a rite of passage, right? If you lose your virginity, that means you're the man. One film that comes to mind is Juice. You got the juice now, things like that. There's plenty of films I can mention, like Coach Carter, all these kind of things. The reason why I mention these kind of things is because there's so much societal pressure that says, if you become a man, you have sex with all these women, then all of a sudden you become more manly, you have more friends, everyone's going to be around you. But the truth is this, that just doesn't happen. Like in high school and in college, it'll be cool for a little while. Well, then after a while, it just becomes played out because now all of a sudden, like these women are starting to catch on to it. They start to realize, like, there's no stability with this man. He has a lack of impulse control. That's what happens with addiction, especially sex addiction. One of the things I've always seen is compulsive disorders. Also, having a problem with just understanding is that you don't have to control everything that's around you. So a lot of men have honestly control issues because of that lack of fatherhood, that lack of friendship, or just having people die in their life. So they try to control everything around them. So they try to control women and everyone else around them, and eventually no one wants to be around them. So how I help out men when it comes to sexual addiction, I just tell them like, you got to stop controlling people. If you lose friends because you don't want to have sex with all these women, it's okay. And for men that I see around me, like younger men too, I told them it's okay to be a virgin. It's okay to just want to be married with one woman and one woman only. That's it. And then you guys just explore each other. You don't have to go around here sleeping around with all these women. And most importantly, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. You're supposed to just follow what God wants you to do. And that's that. That's all that you're required to do as a man.
I love that. And I think more men need to have this conversation. It's so stigmatized, it's so taboo, but you bringing that to the forefront can help so many people. Like, you don't have to be just out here slinging it to every single person. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay for you to have standards for yourself as a man and be able to be like, no, this is not the path that I want to go down. And you're allowing people to have that conversation and normalize it that that path is not normal and it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, definitely. Just so many men. And I've also met men. Like one guy I met, he's a lawyer, he's a model, he's an actor, and he's never had sex before. And he's like, I think 29 years old. I'm 30. So just things like that. Like I've met other men, like I've joined other communities before where like these men, they just never had sex and they're successful. So I know a lot of men want to be successful. So I told them there's a scripture that says, whoever worships pleasure will become poor. That's what I tell a lot of men. It's like, that's the thing that I tell you. It's like if you keep on worshiping all these random women and trying to be with all these women to be some kind of a big shot, you're gonna end up poor trying to be something that you're not. That's one thing I had to learn. I was going to bars and clubs, dropping like $200, $400 just so I could get some validation from some women who didn't want to be around me. And it's like I could have just took that, poured more into choosing your freedom 5 years ago, and I could have been a lot more ahead of the game. But it took me a while to realize that. And a lot of men don't realize that till they're in their 50s and their 60s. So that's why I tell men, young and old, like stay with one woman and one woman only. And don't be having sex with anybody. You can contract a soul tie. And when you contract a soul tie with somebody, then it's a lot more harder for you to get rid of that soul tie because now you're obsessed with this person, you're fantasizing with that person, now you're calling them and texting them and going back to addiction, how so many men have compulsive disorders and control issues. Now you end up becoming a stalker, and then you're going to end up in jail, or she's going to give you a restraining order. So you don't want that to happen.
Yes, it can spiral into something bigger than it needs to be, right? And I think another thing that's really important is realizing the people that you have around you, the company that you keep says a lot about you. And I think it's important when you are going down this path of going against the grain and doing something different. Sometimes that does mean having to end relationships and friendships with people who are not serving your higher good. That's difficult in and of itself. So, how do you kind of tell your clients to navigate when it's time to really release these toxic relationships and start forming new ones and being around community that you can lean on?
Well, I refer them to the Bible, where it talks about how Jesus was in the wilderness. How Jesus was in the wilderness. He was in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. He ain't had no food, no water, no nothing. He just had the Father upstairs. He was all. He was Father, Son, and one all together. It was Jesus versus the devil. He was tempted with lust, food, power, money, all these things. And he always told them, like, no, it is written that I'm not doing this. It's written I'm not doing that. Do not test the Lord. So I tell people, you are going to be, when you become sober, you will be in a wilderness. I know for this from experience. Like, I lost friends, I lost family. People thought I changed up on them. I ain't changed up on nobody. The truth is this: I wanted better for myself, but the people around me, they don't want better for themselves. It says in the Bible that bad company corrupts good character. So when you start to develop good character, naturally a lot of people are just going to drift away. I told my clients, just let them drift away. That's it. Let them drift away.
Yeah, absolutely. You make room for more people, more better company to come into your life when you decide to cut those ties. And yes, it can be uncomfortable. Yes, it can be lonely, but it's going to be so worth it. When you know your purpose and you know that you want more for yourself, please remember that at the end of the day. Remember why you're doing this, and the right company will come around you when you're open to receiving that.
That's definitely, yeah. Because the thing about it is, like, if you don't have that accountability and that self awareness to realize that you deserve better, and also just the thing about it is negative thought patterns. A lot of men have a lot of negative thought patterns and they live in the past and, like, what am I going to do now? It's like, well, all these successful people, they cut people off too. And you keep on talking about how you want to be successful, but you don't want to cut off the bad company. So it ain't making no sense. That's all I'm saying. It ain't making no sense.
Yes, I love it. I love the real approach that you got. Like, you just say it how it is. And I think
That's
people just
it.
need to hear that, right? It's the truth.
Yeah.
No sugarcoating around here, y'all. Okay, so you made a documentary called Help Us that addresses issues surrounding addiction and recovery. So, what inspired you to create this film, and what message do you hope it conveys to viewers?
Yeah, so like what Help Us is strictly focused on the heroin epidemic in Enfield, Connecticut. Me and the director were talking about it, and I could not find anything. It was really just for an internship. So I could not find anything in Enfield. Like, you got to find something in Enfield. I'm like, what am I going to find in Enfield? Nothing happens in Enfield. Like, it's a small little town, don't nothing happen. But I was like, okay. He talked to me about it, and I was like, I'll give it consideration. So I was going to do something about cars. I was like, well, that's just kind of boring, and ain't nobody gonna tune into that. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna find something different. So when he talked about that, I started realizing there's all these people who are doing something about it, but like they didn't get any kind of attention from the news. They didn't get any attention from the newspaper or nothing. So I was like, I just went out. We recorded this thing. I think we shot the whole thing in about a month or so because I didn't have a lot of time, and I was only there for about 8, 12 weeks anyway, and it was strictly just an internship anyway. So I was just like, I gotta make the best out of this. I had to write a script. I had to find a direct, I had to find an assistant director, camera people, all these kind of things. But yeah, what inspired me to really do it was really just simply because nobody likes to talk about addiction. And it always bothers me that people don't like to talk about elephants in the room anyways. We know that there's a lot of people who are around my age who struggle with substance abuse and addiction, and we want some help, but all these recovery centers, like I love AA, I love sober recovery, but a good majority of them, from my perspective, didn't look like me and were not around my age. So I decided, you know what, I want to spread awareness on this topic.
I'm so here for that. That makes me think about my slogan for my show. We're going to talk about the shit you don't want to talk about, but it needs to be talked about. We're going to put the uncomfortable elephant in the room, like you said, in front of your face in order for us to normalize having these conversations and start the healing process for someone who maybe hasn't found the strength within themselves to really come forward and talk about what they're going through. So I appreciate you for doing that. How can people watch that?
So basically, it is on YouTube. So it should be, if you go to my Instagram page, you click on there, and the documentary should be on there because it's not on my personal YouTube page. It's on Enfield Television's YouTube page. So
Awesome. We will definitely link that in the show notes. Thank you so much for what you're doing. So, talk a little bit about your approach to coaching a client through recovery. What are some practices you emphasize in your coaching sessions?
my main thing is to make it like a conversation. I don't really look at it as, oh, I'm the coach and I'm better than you, because I know men just got egos and deal with pride. So I don't want anyone thinking like I'm trying to control who you are, control who you want you to be. I don't want to shape you into any kind of image at all. Like, I'm not here to do that. My approach is really just to have a conversation, get to the root cause, come up with very practical solutions as soon as I can, because you may come back, you may not come back, but I'm not a control freak like I used to be, but I had to learn that was one of my character defects. So I don't try to control things. I just go with the flow now. I've given this guy the solutions. At the end, I've given you a PDF to, basically say what's the plan going forward. And if you come back, you come back. Or if you don't need me anymore, you don't need me anymore. Either way, it's cool, but I'm still going to be in your corner. So that's how I essentially approach it.
Yeah, I love that. Definitely will leave his info in the show notes if you guys want to check him out and possibly work with him. I'll have you plug that up at the end of the conversation. I do want to ask you, as a life and recovery coach, what are some common misconceptions about addiction and trauma that you come across, and how do you address them?
Oh man, one that comes to mind is if you just have that perfect mom and dad family and you live in the suburbs and nothing happens, you can never battle with addiction. That is the biggest lie of them all. Because I know a lot of people who live in a lot of good environments. Most of the friends I used to hang out with back in the day, they would snort cocaine and do heroin. And the truth is this, they had their mom and their dad in their life. They had a rich, privileged family. I tell people this all the time. Maybe people say I simplify too much. I don't care. If a kid don't get no attention, they will most likely get into addiction. Parents, you got to find a way to just spend time with your kids. I'm not a parent myself, but that's one of the things I tell people. Like, you got to find a way to spend some time with your kids. That's just the way it is, because that's the biggest misconception I always see. If somebody just has a good privileged environment, it don't matter if someone has a good privileged environment if they don't get attention. I think another misconception that is a male thing or a woman thing, or you're like some kind of a weakness or something like that. The other misconception is, oh, you must be weak or something. You gotta just toughen up and pull it up by your bootstraps, like it's the 1950s or something like that. And it's like, even in that era, they was going through their struggles too. And I bet you they were thinking about these things, but didn't know how to verbalize it out of their mouth. So that's what I've seen as well. So how I approach it, I just tell people, look, listen, anybody could battle with an addiction. There's nothing wrong with you. You may have a chemical imbalance in your brain that you don't even know about. You may have undisclosed mental health issues, because when I started doing more of the healing work, I started remembering things that I totally just blocked out, but I was okay. And also my faith. And one thing I like about my church is they talk about mental health. They have things like grief share. They have things like sober recovery, because they focus on mind, body, and soul, which is important because as a Christian man, I go through mental, physical, and spiritual things on a regular basis. Sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it's mental, sometimes it's physical. But at the end of the day, the way I look at it is like this: I'm still a human being. And everybody who's ever battled an addiction, they're still human beings.
Mm. So good. Oh my God. I love this conversation so much. I need more men to be having conversations like you out here. You're doing such amazing work. And the last question that I want to ask you about is your business. Again, it's called Choosing Your Freedom. and you discussed that concept of choosing freedom. So, what does freedom mean to you personally? And how can someone, especially those recovering from trauma or addiction, find their own path to freedom?
Well, freedom for me is just finding what God wants you to do in your life. As simple as that. And that's what I told my clients. You got to find God for you. You can't let the church do it. You can't let your friends do it, your family do it. A recommendation I could give you is reading the book of Proverbs, reading the book of Psalms, and also reading the book of John to learn about Jesus. Proverbs is more for wisdom, and Psalms has a lot of prayers that are in there as well that can help you, encourage you, and inspire you. But those would be my three recommendations from the Bible to read. And if you decide to go to church, that's your business. If you don't, that's also your business. I'm not going to force you to. I have my church home. They're very supportive, but I understand from trauma, mental health, and addiction, it can be hard to let people in. So that's also something that you're going to have to personally work on as well with yourself. So that's true freedom right there. Like how you choose your freedom is choosing to really just be in tune with God for yourself and not what everybody else wants you to do.
Mm, so powerful. Now, I want to ask you, since you're on the Watch Us Thrive podcast, tell me, what does thriving mean to you?
I believe that thriving means to me is just taking it one day at a time, but most importantly, moving forward and just leaving the past behind. Because if you still dwelling in the past, you ain't thriving. That's the way I look at it.
Yes, yes. So amazing. Caleb, I want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing your testimony. You're so powerful. The work that you're doing is so needed. I want you to plug in how people can follow you, any special projects you got coming up, and any last words you want to leave the people with.
Yeah, so basically, like the easiest way to find me is a man named Caleb. If you go to the website that's on IG, you'll be able to find my website, and that's where you can find all my stuff that's on there. Basically, I'm always active on IG. I'm on Facebook as well, and yeah, that's basically how you could find me.
Yes. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being a voice for men to be able to come into these spaces around trauma and healing and opening up about their addictions and all of these things that we really need to see people who look like us that we can relate to. I just appreciate you so much for the work that you're doing. So continue, because we need more men like you having these conversations.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks for having me.